So it is my honor to welcome Dr. Ali, who will continue the panel.
Thank you so much, Dave, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our healthcare panel discussion. My name is Ali, and I'm the Senior Investment Director of CGC Capital. Today we have a very distinguished panel, and it's also an honor for me to be here on the panel with our guest. So before we start, I would like to first thank the audience for attending and also welcome you all for coming to this event. So today's topic, we will focus in many perspectives. We will mainly talking about the future of healthcare innovation. So later we will hear from our panelists about the trend of current healthcare innovation, the controversial digital health bubble, and also the artificial intelligence-powered healthcare innovation. Additionally, we're going to also hear from panelists about how their thoughts were influenced by working from a small startup to large corporation, and also the challenges they are facing, and also how they identify healthcare investment opportunities. So without further ado, I would like to have each of our panelists to introduce about themselves, who they are, and also what their role in the company. So we will start with my good friend Orrin from RedCrow.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. Well, I appreciate it. My name is Orrin Ailloni-Charas. I'm actually a doctor, anesthesiologist. I work in San Francisco, and I'm also involved in the early stage healthcare investing space. I'm the managing director at RedCrow and the founding and managing director at Hambrecht Ducera Ventures.
Hi everyone, my name is Jason Hwang. Like Warren, I'm a physician. I trained as an internal medicine doctor. Ended up going to business school and wrote a book called The Innovator's Prescription, and worked a few years as an academic at a think tank. From there, transitioned into the world of entrepreneurship and became one of the co-founders and chief medical officer of a digital health company called Lemonade Health, and then have transitioned away from that into the investor space, and now I'm a partner at a...
Actually, what I focus on is mission, and where are we specifically looking for external technologies and services, and helping align that with our investment themes, and where we're looking as a venture fund to invest. And then also supporting our current portfolio companies when we do invest in whether they have current partnerships, product development, whether it's business development and trying to find the right operational leaders where there's a mutually beneficial relationship that could happen, but essentially being the guide and the conduit between our portfolio companies, and we have about 30 active portfolio companies and 400 million invested. My background, a little bit different. I call myself kind of a reluctant wanderer into venture. I started off as a health educator in medically underserved communities, worked to lead national quality programs in outpatient, home-based palliative care, hospice, home health, and then worked in the aging in place space in the startup realm. But happened to come into this role because as they were looking for this conduit role, really wanted somebody with either quality, operational, and has worked in an early stage startup. So the cross-section.
Quite experience. So thank you all for sharing this information, and it's really also a very valuable and also wonderful opportunity to have you all gathering here, each with a very different, also a unique background. So our next 40 minutes will be really fun, also insightful. So Orrin, you are the managing director of RedCrow, which is a crowdsourced healthcare investment platform. So can you tell us a little bit more of what is a crowdfunding and how is that different from the traditional VC platform?
Sure, thank you. So what we've identified at RedCrow is that early stage investing in healthcare is very complicated. And it's a space that's underserved. A lot of larger institutional players have not wanted to be in that space anymore because it requires a lot of work, requires a lot of risk, and it's not usually for a very large investment at first. So we put together a large network of physicians and other healthcare providers, as well as scientists and innovative, interested third parties to understand. So we literally crowdsource the evaluation of the companies that come to our platform. And then once companies have been crowdsource evaluated and internally evaluated and felt to have good success factors, we then go ahead and we promote them for investment. so that we crowdsource and crowdfund them as well. So it's crowdsourcing evaluation, crowdsourcing the funding. So in some respects, it's like a more traditional crowdsource platform, but the thing we're doing that's particularly different, other than focusing on healthcare, is we're providing investors with a document and materials to help understand what the company is doing and some validation.
So that is really also a beneficial side of a crowdfunding platform compared to other traditional VC platforms. So those are really helpful information. And it's also a topic that is important enough to really talk about the whole afternoon in time for me. Thank you so much. So Jason, you are a physician, entrepreneur, author, and also public speaker. And right now you are a healthcare investor. So how has your varied background give you some particular perspective when it comes to the healthcare investment?
I think in an industry that's as complex as healthcare, it's been extremely helpful, I think, to have worn that many hats in different roles in the industry. And it's because I think in that entangled industry, whenever you're trying to build something new or even just make something better, it's essential to try to make sure that all of these various interests are aligned well to ensure a good chance of success. And I think especially in my latest roles as an entrepreneur and now as an investor, I think you want to make sure that whatever venture you're getting into, that you have those interests as well aligned, as many of them as aligned as possible, to make sure that you have the greatest chance of success. And so it's not necessarily a career path I would recommend for anybody, but it comes out of a sense, I think, of getting bored easily and wanting to see what else I can do with my skill set. But I think it's important, even if you come from one particular function or silo of healthcare, that you always keep in mind that there's always going to be an impact on all of these various roles, whether it's patients or providers, the hospitals and clinics, the payers and purchasers, the government. All of these entities somehow are impacted by any change you want to bring to healthcare. And so having that perspective in mind is, I think, very important.
It's very interesting, and also I hope this could be also beneficial and useful for some of our audience members who also come with their own unique background, also a career path. So Shruti, your role involves bridging the venture and also Kaiser Permanente organization. So can you tell us a little more of your role in Kaiser Permanente and how you bridge the gap between the venture investment and also the operation?
Yeah, and I should start by saying, as a venture fund, when we make investments, we don't tie them to operational partnerships. Some other strategic funds are different, and they do, but we don't. And while it's not unique for a provider, payer, system to have a venture fund in this kind of day and age, KP was one of the first to do it. We started in the 90s. And so our mission has really evolved over time. So when we first started, it really was about financial returns. And as we grew in this space of venture and had success, we realized we had a mission of really advancing innovation that's meaningful for our members, our providers, our systems. And so when you think about kind of the privilege of venture capital and being able to invest in spaces and help support innovation in meaningful areas, right? So they can test and iterate and so on their products. We, as Kaiser Permanente, the operational organization, we sit on this great resource of thousands of physicians, like hundreds of thousands of millions actually of members, and we need to glean that information and really understand where is it that we need innovation, where external technologies and services, where is the marketplace not cutting it, and where do we need more targeted innovation? Where is it that we're not looking for big vendors like Epic to build things out, and where are we not building internal capacity for? So these are all, our venture fund is pretty small, and our investors, we're making active investments, sitting on boards, and so there was nobody really to think about this or to make the connections in a more robust sort of network-wide way. And so they created this role. And so my job when I when I talk about understanding the evolving needs and trends of Kaiser Permanente as an organization and then aligning them to our investment themes, it's really about this piece. It's about where can we invest in meaningful change for healthcare as an industry? And that truly has become a part of our mission as a venture fund generally. So financial returns and also to advance meaningful innovation. And then the other thing is so we have about 30 companies I mentioned, and more than half of them actually have partnerships with Kaiser Permanente. So while we don't tie them to our investment, we've done our due diligence in understanding whether these are good companies in good spaces that we're looking for actual innovation, and we loop in our physician network, our operational leads, whoever it might be in the diligence process. But then as a smaller stage company, it's really hard to, and this is across industries, to understand large enterprises where it's very layered, who's the right, where's the right front door to go into essentially to an organization if you feel like you have something that can bring about meaningful change for that organization. So that's all, with that navigation is what I help our companies with. And it's proven successful so far. We've had several companies sort of be connected to the right leader within the organization who has operational budget to actually make these decisions and move along, and also helping with product development and supporting that partnership as it grows.
It's a focus of both of the financial and also strategic direction from both sides. So those are very important. Those are very also helpful for us to understand how this large corporate work from also especially an insider's perspective. So thank you so much. So for those who have been following the healthcare investment trend, 2018 was certainly a big year. It was a record year with like $30 billion coming from the healthcare investor coming in, and the startup has raised much more money than any time during the past 10 years. So it was definitely a revolution in time during that time. So from the investor perspective, if you want to give some advice to the startup companies, such as some of our audience who are building their own company and are doing the fundraising, what a VC are looking for when they look for the company to invest in the healthcare sector, coming from an investor perspective?
That's a really good question, and I think that first you have to recognize there are different investors. Some of them will come in at the earlier stages and they're willing to take risks. Others are really going to wait. They want to be a part of healthcare, but they want de-risk properties with EBITDA and things like that. So it really depends first on the investor. If you're going to be raising money as an early stage company, I think that it's important to demonstrate your innovation. I think that's what excites people, and that's why people want to be in that space. You also have to recognize that there are certain companies that are appropriate for venture type investing, and there are certain companies that aren't. You really do have to show a return to investors, and if you're bringing VC money on in particular, they really want to see a good return on investment. So your company has to be able to scale and grow to a point at which it provides them with the expected return on investment. There's a lot of ways to maximize the likelihood of getting help, but certainly affiliations with good accelerators, good academic institutions, having really good quality people working with you as advisors, those are all things that are very valuable. And certainly, the interesting thing about healthcare companies when they're in their earlier stages, they have a very prescriptive path to growth. They have to have their IP and protect it. They have to incorporate. They have to build out their initial team. They have to go through the FDA, do preclinical trials, clinical trials, and so forth. And each of these moments in time are valuation inflections. So you want to be able to grow your company as far as you can with as little money as possible, perhaps getting grant money, and then bring in the VC money as late as you have to, because then you start to lose a little bit of control.
So those are really useful information. And Jason, so coming from a healthcare investor perspective, you have a very interesting investment approach, electing to focus on disruptive innovation. So can you also tell us a little more about your definition of what does disruptive innovation mean for your investment philosophy?
There's a couple of things that I think differentiate the fund that I work with compared to others. The first is not that unique, but is a differentiator, which is that we are more or less a quant fund. We rely heavily on software analytics to screen large numbers of companies that a human being couldn't afford to do. But the second thing is what I think it convinced me to work with this particular team, and that is that we share a fundamental belief that investing in primarily disruptive innovations would give us an ability to achieve outsized gains compared to the competition. And again, that was going to be a differentiator for us. And so what we mean by disruptive innovation is, Ravi alluded to it in his talk after lunch, and that is that you have one set of innovations that tend to come from elephants. These are entrenched incumbents in an industry. They are the ones currently in power. Their mission typically is to try to preserve the status quo and enhance their role in it. And that can be a source of great investment revenue, and a lot of innovation happens in that space. But when we look for disruptive innovation, we're typically looking outside of these core entrenched stakeholders, and instead looking at what innovations tend to be coming in from outsiders, people who aren't currently in healthcare, people who are developing business models and transitioning them from another sector into healthcare. But most importantly, what disruptive innovation has at its core is that it creates new markets by addressing what we call non-consumption. Non-consumption are segments of consumers who are not utilizing whatever is available to them from the status quo. And in healthcare, we have a lot of that. We have a lot of people who do not use healthcare resources for whatever reason. Sometimes it's too expensive, sometimes it's not available or too far, sometimes it's too difficult to use. But for any of these reasons, those are potential customers that could be captured that are not being chased after by the status quo. And if you can find business models that are actively looking at these non-consuming populations, trying to build something that's cheaper, easier to use, more conveniently available, if it tries to target those pockets of non-consumption, to us, those are some of these new venture growth areas that are going to deliver those outsized gains that we're trying to give our investors.
It's quite an interesting approach, and for those who would like to know more detail, I would also recommend our audience to read Jason's other authored books.
Thank you. I should mention, I'm not the name author. The lead author on that book is going to be much more familiar to you guys. His name is Clayton Christensen, well-known Harvard Business School professor. So if you are a fan of his, you're a fan of the theory, please feel free to pick up the book. Thank you for the plug.
Shruti, can you tell us from the large corporations perspective, what is Kaiser Permanente's organization's investment area now in healthcare sector, and how does Kaiser Permanente Venture evaluate all these opportunities to especially add values to your portfolio companies network?
Yeah, so key areas of focus for us right now are women's health, medical care in the home, digital therapeutics. But I should also just say that, right, we hear these big buzzwords in healthcare like clinician burnout and care experience and absorbing growth or creating access, and we hear these as like, oh, these are areas of opportunity, but when you think about it, what does that actually mean? And what I'll say is what we look for in companies, generally speaking, is that they're hitting a lot of these big buzzword items. And a great sort of example, I stole his mic. Like a great example, for example, is like Genome Medical. We invested in this company where they do virtual genetic counseling services. So with 23andMe and companies like this, it's created a demand for services, but the ratio for genetic counselors, it has not increased. And so on our systems, generally speaking, this is not just Kaiser Permanente, this is sort of national US, there has been a strain, and there is a wait list at many places to see a genetic counselor, internal medicine physicians, pediatricians, family docs. These people are not trained to read these things. And so when you look at a service that Genome Medical has created with their virtual genetic counseling services and suite of tools for physicians who are encountering this, you see that there is improvement on the clinician burnout side, on the creating access side, the care experience from the member-patient perspective. So things like this, companies that really address, when you hear these big buzzwords of things, of areas of opportunity within healthcare, if you're a company who can address all these things and be affordable, that's amazing. I think that is huge. And that, for Kaiser Permanente, for our venture fund, is truly what we focus on. So while we have these big investment theses, if we encounter companies who are doing this in a really meaningful way, and we're a more mature investor, so we are Series B and post-Series B, and what we look for too is we never want to be the only customer that a company has. We look to see if these customers have other, clients essentially that are health plans or providers and systems. And that's an indication to us that yes, you're solving a real need that we think is a real need too, and you're operationalizable essentially, right? That's the other big thing. You can have the best product in the world, but if you are hard to operationalize it, it's never gonna work. It's just not. And you think of all the ticket items in healthcare that need operational funding, and this is really key because again, you could be an amazing company with an amazing product, but for operational decision makers who have a list of 100 things that need funding, why are you meaningful? And again, if you can get to those big ticket items in an affordable way, that's when you're meaningful.
That's a perfect also explanation for how to work with a large corporate and also the value they can add to the portfolio startup companies network. So, okay, so let's go to the next question of our favorite topic, artificial intelligence. So as we all know, artificial intelligence is becoming a transformational power in many industries, and especially in healthcare, its impact is truly life-changing. So from hospital care to clinical research, from drug development to insurance, AI application definitely has a big impact in the healthcare network. So, Orrin, what is your vision for the future of AI-powered technology, and what do you think the way AI technology is gonna change of our healthcare system?
In so many ways, no doubt. I think that two of the ways that I'm looking at a lot of opportunities today are decision-making platforms, radiology, assessing MRIs and things like that. And you see a lot of that, and it has a lot of AI integration. That's very interesting. One of the ways that I think is going to be very cool, but it's not quite ready for prime time, and what Shruti was talking about, which was making the user experience for patients and hospital staff easier, is a lot of the voice-to-chart recognition, so that you can have these virtual assistants with you and you don't have to be recording the electronic medical record all the time. And I think when that gets done well, that'll be very, very powerful and ubiquitous.
So with that, the application of AI also would take a couple years for a full promise. So do you have some comments regarding, let's say, how long it's going to really take for a full launching of the AI use in our healthcare whole system?
It's really hard. I don't think that I would necessarily be the expert in that area. I can say that there are already areas in which AI is being utilized, and it's being utilized well. But when you see this full functionality, I suspect we're several years off from that.
Okay, great. So, Jason, what do you think, where is the future of AI-powered technology, given especially your desire in disruptive innovation?
I think I agree the potential impact of AI is tremendous. The problem is some of the things that we've been aiming at, like improving the diagnosis of cancer, is almost always forever 5 to 10 years away. Because we're trying to match the clinical acumen of a highly trained and highly skilled expert. And building that type of software to get machine learning and artificial intelligence systems to that capability is going to take a long time. And instead, I think in typical disruptive innovation fashion, I think where I would point your eyes toward is perhaps some of the simpler areas that are precursors to artificial intelligence. So before you even get into enhancing or someday replacing a clinician's expertise, are there algorithms, simple algorithms, simple branching algorithms that could help address some very basic needs of patients who are currently not being serviced by clinics and clinicians. Those are very simple problems that can be solved very easily with things that I would never call artificial intelligence. They're basically just sophisticated software programs. But these are some of the ingredients that you need to build first before you get to the point where we all hope we get to.
Yeah, I just want to say, I totally agree, and I think mental health and wellness is a big area for this as well. When you look at subacute populations and also just kind of, the epidemic that we do have, and how long people wait to get seen by somebody, and of course there's virtual options now too with companies like Ginger.io, but there is this sort of triage version, and I think that can be applied to a lot of different areas, like Jason mentioned.
Definitely bring us some also particular to the dialogue that was never available before. So Shruti, I have a different question for you. So 2018 was also a record year for digital health, with $3.2 billion coming from investor side coming into this healthcare investment sector, which surpassed 2017 by 42%. However, there are also signs of stress, such as like a faster cash burn rate, such as like a skyrocketing valuation, and also lack of a growth of startup exit. So, do you think there is a bubble in the digital health sector? And how do you and also your team from Kaiser Permanente respond to it?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, like it's a changing, evolving marketplace in terms of when you think of like that $5+ billion in digital health that's being poured into it. You look at the outcomes, everyone's sort of touting, we have better outcomes, we save you money, or your clinical quality, your care experience, whatever it is. But there's very little standard measurement across the board of these companies of what does that actually look like. In traditional ways, when you think of like publicly reported quality things like HEDIS and CAPS and OASIS and all these different things, they're too slow. And then you look at traditional academics with peer-reviewed, published studies, that's too slow. So what I think is that yes, there is a bubble, but what I think or I see coming is the banding of voices within the healthcare operational area, where people are like, what's real? What do we actually, because we do want to offer better options to our patients, have better efficient operations, whatever it might be, but what's actually real? And you have folks like, there's an organization called NODE, but essentially evidence of like digital medicine, digital health, what does that look like? Creating new standards. I don't think it's like gonna be here tomorrow, but I do think people are coming together to say, let's create some standard things, let's create some standard ways of evaluating. At KP specifically, when we come across companies, we make 2 to 3 investments a year, but we see thousands of companies. So we go through a lot of companies, we see a lot of different folks in our spaces that we're looking at. We have, I mentioned we have thousands of physicians, we have hundreds of thousands of operational sort of leaders that we pull from. So on our team, we have our investment leads have the expertise of assessing a company and understanding financial viability, right? And we pull in the right amount of experts from all these different operational areas. And we do months of diligence on these companies. We get to know them. We go on site. We understand what their products look like. We talk to their current customers to understand if they're real. So I think we are going to be seeing people in this operational area coming together, because not everyone has the, Kaiser Permanente is huge, and we have our own internal network to go to for these things and to really vet thoroughly. But healthcare venture is very friendly space in terms of if Providence Venture invests in a company, we want to invest in that company, right? And I think that you'll see a shift in this in terms of what clients are asking for from companies, improving the digital health space, proving themselves to customers.
The bottom line is whether there is a bubble or whether the bubble will burst, the true value creator in the healthcare sector will stand tall no matter what. So now let's go to the next question. With technology advanced very fast compared to years ago, VC investors and also others who are interested in the healthcare sectors, they are all seeing the opportunities to invest in the new industrial innovation sector. So can you tell us a little bit more about how has the healthcare industry changed in the past 5 years, and what do you predict will happen in the next 5 years?
So we've had a really interesting seismic shift in healthcare investing, in that a lot of the larger corporations used to be the ones that drove innovation. So the R&D was done at Novartis or Medtronic or whatever. That's stopped to a large degree, and a lot of the larger firms said it's too much money to do too much work in too many areas that fail. And so what that's created is this groundswell of smaller companies coming out of academic centers and developing the early stage companies, and then those companies, they need to go somewhere. And the larger companies are starting to look to acquire them. So historically there was a large desire to go and IPO, and that was your exit. It took a very long time. Today, the trend is that within 5 years, companies are being acquired by larger firms, strategically acquired. They're being acquired pre-FDA approval in their phase 3 trials, they're a drug, or pre-510K or during their 510K process. So you have a lot of activity and a lot of opportunity for early stage startups. That's one really big trend, and makes it very exciting because it creates a very credible acquisition pathway for these companies in a shorter period of time than is historically typical. That means that there's a great opportunity for investors. There are other trends that have been really, really interesting. There's a lot of genomics trends, immunology trends, material science changes, of course computing changes and AI. There's so much happening right now that can be applied to healthcare and healthcare innovation that has just created a really tremendous number of opportunities. So what you really need to do is understand how to vet those opportunities. And then the upsides in healthcare investing is typically very high. You look at a 20 to 30x return on investment for an early stage healthcare company. So it's very risky, but there's a great reward. And if you can reduce that risk with a better investment thesis and vetting process, you can do very well financially and have a great social impact.
All this faster process of executing a process, and also the advancing of this healthcare technology will be also really a good thing for us as from a patient's perspective. So, Jason, from your fund's perspective, what do you think will happen in the next 5 years, or what would be the most interesting trend happening in 2019?
So two very different questions. One is what's going to happen in the next 8 months, where I think you pretty much are not going to be looking at things like AI, molecular and genetic diagnostics, and then some of these other things that are certainly in our future, but are not necessarily going to impact our lives this year. And instead, if you're talking about just 2019, I think I would look, I mean, there's one space in particular that I was a part of before I moved into investing that I had a hand in, and which I think is going to dramatically be impacting this year, which is this new digital health space that is highly transactional, that where people are calling them online pharmacies, or it's basically it's asynchronous telemedicine. This idea that you can log on to a website or go to an app and not have to talk live to anyone, but just fill out a questionnaire. And if you're eligible, you can get a prescription that you can pick up at your pharmacy or have it mailed to your house. A lot of these companies entered the space probably last year or the year before, and have grown so quickly that I think this year is the year that we find out what's going to happen to that particular sector of healthcare. One, is it leading to increasing fragmentation of information and care that erodes that important primary care relationship that we want to have, but patients aren't necessarily valuing because the things they're asking for online are this transactional nature, and therefore they're saying, there are some things I want to see a doctor for, there are other things that I would rather just do separately. And how are we going to solve that? Another element of that is what are regulators going to do about it? You're seeing this dramatic increase now in prescriptions that we don't have enough data yet to know, is it better quality? Is it actually reducing costs? Or even if it's leading to increased costs, is it improving value? We don't have those answers yet, but I think, again, this year is we're going to have a lot more of that data in hand. And the question is, what are regulators going to do? Will the medical board suddenly clamp down on this activity by placing a moratorium on online prescribing? That, there's a potential for this overreach that could potentially shut down this growing segment of healthcare innovation. But I think because of the rapid growth, because of the consumer demand for these services, this year is a year of reckoning for those companies. In terms of 5 years from now, I think you're going to see some growth in some of these advances that we've been talking about for many years. But it's important to know that rarely do you revolutionize the entire industry within 5 years. It usually happens piecemeal. So just like I remember writing about the history of infectious diseases and how management of infectious diseases has transformed from one era, a century ago, where it was very difficult to diagnose. We really didn't know how to diagnose, and we threw a whole bunch of remedies, eventually landed on antibiotics, and now it can be very precise, where we know exactly what organism is affecting you, and we can pick an antibiotic out of the arsenal that hopefully for a few years more still works. But that level of precision only really has impacted infectious diseases and is moving into oncology, but you're seeing sort of this piecemeal transformation in the industry. And so in the next 5 years, I think basically what you should expect is some more of this piecemeal innovation where artificial intelligence enters one specialty, computer vision as part of that enters like dermatology or radiology. You'll have molecular diagnostics transforming other areas.
And also, I would like to also add, I hope our regulation system could also revolutionizing at the same time. So, Shruti, well, it's very important to anticipate the changes of all this healthcare innovation. We should also take a closer look at all these underlying challenges we're facing today. So can you share with us what do you think is the largest challenges from a large corporate's perspective?
Yeah, I think, so two perspectives. The first perspective here is, affordability is huge. And, when we look at our membership within generally the rise in high deductible members. So there's this kind of section happening where there's an increase in consumerism within healthcare, and then there's also the rising costs of everything and cost shifting. Employers are cost shifting a lot with healthcare benefits from them to direct to their employees. So there's a lot of different things happening in the marketplace right now, where these two things of affordability and also better care experiences, consumerism sort of aspect, and everyone sort of has mentioned this aspect of having options, and maybe it's not always a human in front of you who's delivering that, where you go online to do different things. Our system operationally is not set up for that, right? So if you do a virtual visit, a video visit, or a call, or an email with your physician versus going in as a high deductible member because you don't, you want to avoid your copay, and that makes sense, you have a quick question, totally. That on the clinician burnout side of it, right? You're still answering all those emails, you're still having those video calls. So a part of this, with all this innovation that's coming in and trying to better serve the patient populations, is also figuring out on the other end operationally, how do you meet that really? So and so there's a lot of innovation out there that can be helpful, but it's just the integrating everything so it's very meaningful and done in a way where it actually works.
Okay, so I don't think we have any time for the questions, so we will come to the end of the panel discussion. And I would like to thank again our panelists for your participation, and I hope our audience would also find this section to be helpful. Thank you so much for your time.